The boutique was every bit the picture of high-end luxury. The gleaming marble floors reflected the sparkling light from crystal chandeliers that hung gracefully from the ceiling. Every inch of the space screamed elegance, from the pristine glass shelves housing high-fashion accessories to the neatly arranged racks filled with designer clothes. The atmosphere was one of exclusivity, where wealth and privilege seemed to permeate the air, making anyone who entered feel like they had stepped into a world reserved only for the elite. However, this world wasn't quite as inviting as it appeared. Rosa Ellis, an 84-year-old woman with a gentle demeanor and a regal presence, stepped into the boutique with a slow, measured pace. Her movements were deliberate, though slightly unsteady. She had lived many years, each one etched into her life story, but her grace had never faltered. She still wore a smile that could light up a room, lipstick carefully applied, and a hat perched perfectly atop her head. She had chosen to wear her best, despite the years that had weighed on her. She was still a lady, after all. Rosa had come to the boutique for a simple reason. Her grandson, Michael, was the CEO of a prominent fashion brand, and today was a special day. She was attending an event where he would be making a major announcement, a proud moment in his career, one that Rosa couldn't wait to support. But little did she know that this day would also become a moment of awakening for everyone involved in her encounter with the boutique. As she entered the store, she was met with nothing. No warm greetings, no smiles, no welcoming, "Can I help you?" or "Welcome in." Just silence, followed by a few dismissive glances. The young salespeople, busy in their own worlds, looked her way only briefly, but then quickly turned their attention back to the task at hand. The way they looked at her was almost condescending. It was as if she didn't belong there. She wasn't the right kind of customer, and they made it painfully obvious. One young clerk, an eager intern, or perhaps just a jaded employee, whispered something to another. "She's not going to buy anything. Just let her browse." The two exchanged a knowing look and moved away, leaving Rosa to wander the boutique alone. Rosa wasn't shopping for herself, really. She was just there to pass the time before the event, quietly observing the luxurious items displayed before her. But she was still a person, and she still deserved to be treated with respect. She wanted to ask about a silk scarf she had noticed in the display window, something that caught her eye, but no one came forward to assist her. She walked over to the counter, stood there for a moment, and then with a soft smile on her face, asked one of the clerks, "Excuse me, could you tell me about that scarf in the window?" But instead of a polite response, she received an even more dismissive glance. The clerk didn't even acknowledge her question, too busy chatting with a colleague. The conversation about her, but not with her, was carried on without even the faintest attempt to provide any assistance. The tone was clear. Rosa wasn't worthy of their attention. It stung more than she let on. She stood there for a few moments, feeling small. She had seen people give her looks before, but this was different. It felt like being invisible. She wasn't just ignored, she was disregarded, dismissed as someone who didn't belong in this polished world of fashion and style. Rosa didn't push any further. Instead, she turned and walked out, a tear welling up in her eye as she stepped back out into the street. The weight of her treatment was heavy on her shoulders, but she held her head high, refusing to let the moment break her. In that brief, disheartening experience, she had learned something valuable. It wasn't about the silk scarf. It wasn't even about the boutique. It was about how easily people could judge based on appearance, how often the elderly were overlooked in society, and how entitlement was often reserved for the ones who fit a certain mold. The ones deemed worthy by the standards of wealth and class. What Rosa didn't know, though, was that the grandson she so dearly loved was a man who would stop at nothing to make sure that no one else would ever be treated this way again, least of all his beloved grandmother. Michael Ellis was a force to be reckoned with. As the CEO of a rapidly growing fashion empire, he was used to handling press conferences, meeting with top designers, and overseeing brand strategies. He had worked tirelessly to build his business from the ground up. His success was a reflection of his hard work, determination, and resilience. But what truly defined him was his unwavering commitment to his values: fairness, integrity, and respect for others. Rosa's treatment at the boutique would not go unnoticed. When Michael learned of what had happened, his heart sank. He had always known his grandmother to be a kind, loving, and gracious woman. To think that someone had treated her so poorly simply because of her age and appearance enraged him. He was a man of action, and he wasn't about to let this incident slide under the radar. The boutique's behavior, its employees' attitudes, and the disregard shown to his grandmother went against everything Michael stood for. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a deeper, systemic problem. A problem that Michael knew he had the power to correct. And so, Michael set out on a mission to ensure that no one else, especially the elderly, would ever be subjected to this kind of treatment again. As Rosa made her way home that day, she had no idea what was about to happen. But Michael was about to turn this situation into a lesson for the entire fashion industry. One that would change the way people viewed respect, dignity, and how they treated those who may not always fit the mold of what society considers worthy. And it would all start with him taking a stand for his grandmother, the woman who had always supported him, who had always been there for him, no matter the odds. This was only the beginning. Rosa Ellis had never been one to make a scene. She was a lady through and through, always graceful, even when life made things difficult. So when she left the boutique that day, she did so with the same poise that she carried with her everywhere. But inside, she couldn't help but feel a little broken. She had walked into that high-end store with the same excitement as any other customer. But for her, it was a quiet joy, an innocent curiosity about a piece of luxury that had caught her eye. Yet what she hadn't anticipated was the sting of being dismissed as if she didn't belong. She wasn't in the mood to dwell on it, but the more she thought about it, the more it ate away at her. The experience, though brief, was a reflection of the world she had lived in for so long. It wasn't new to her to feel invisible, but that didn't mean it was any easier to bear. Rosa carefully arranged her purse under her arm as she made her way to the front door. She had come out of the boutique, head held high, trying not to let the hurt show on her face. She walked toward the nearby bench, knowing she had a long wait ahead of her before Michael's event started. It was only then, as she sat there, that the magnitude of the incident truly began to settle in. Michael had told her that night would be special. He had worked so hard to get where he was, and tonight he would finally have the spotlight. He had made it, and she couldn't wait to show her support, to be there for him. But as she sat on that bench, waiting, all she could think about was the way she had been treated. A few minutes later, Michael's text came through. "Granny, I'm so excited for you to be here tonight. Can't wait to see you at the event. I'll be there to pick you up soon." She smiled at the message. She couldn't wait to see his beaming face, all polished up and ready to take the stage. Rosa carefully typed a reply, though her fingers trembled slightly as she did. "I'm so proud of you, my dear. I'll be there soon." But even as she typed those words, she felt the weight of the afternoon pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't the first time she had been made to feel small. She had been a part of this world for long enough to understand the silent judgments. The way people could dismiss her because of her age, her appearance, or the way she carried herself. But it didn't make it any easier to accept. As she waited for Michael's car, Rosa couldn't help but think about the interactions she had had in the boutique. The way the young employees had looked at her with those pitying glances, as if she were an oddity in their world. Their whispered comments had barely registered at first, but now in the quiet of her waiting time, those words seemed to echo louder in her mind. She must be lost, or shopping for her rich daughter. The sting of those words resurfaced. Rosa wasn't lost. She knew exactly where she was, exactly what she wanted. She wasn't there to buy expensive items to impress anyone. She was there because, for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine being part of a world that was different from her own. A world where elegance and luxury were the norm. And then there was the clerk, the one who had looked at her as if she didn't belong. When Rosa had asked about the scarf, the clerk had turned away, offering no help. The words that followed, "You can open it from there," and "This isn't a limo," cut deeper than Rosa cared to admit. She had seen that attitude before, in places where age or status dictated how people were treated. But she had never thought she'd face it like this, in a store that prided itself on luxury and exclusivity. Minutes passed, and Rosa slowly pulled herself together. Internally, she knew Michael would want her to be cheerful, to put the negative behind her. After all, tonight was about him, about his moment in the spotlight. But even as she told herself that, the truth was still hard to swallow. She had been invisible, not just to the young staff at the boutique, but to the world that often overlooked the elderly, assuming they didn't matter as much. When Michael's car finally arrived, Rosa straightened up. She forced a smile onto her face as she approached the door. The chauffeur got out, but instead of rushing to open the door, he stood there, waiting. There was a brief moment of awkwardness, but he eventually opened the door and helped her in. Rosa didn't comment on the slight delay. She was a lady, after all. She would never make a fuss over something so small. As Michael drove her to the event, she could feel the tears threatening to rise in her eyes, but she pushed them back. Tonight wasn't about her, it was about him. She would make sure she gave him the support he deserved, no matter how she felt inside. At the event, Michael was already on stage, speaking to the crowd with the kind of passion that only someone who had worked tirelessly for their dreams could muster. Rosa watched from her seat, beaming with pride, wiping away a tear as she saw her grandson up there. But then, just before the event ended, something unexpected happened. As the crowd began to disperse, Michael made his way down the stage, his eyes scanning the audience. When he saw Rosa, his face lit up, and he rushed toward her, beaming with joy. "Granny, I did it! You were here to see it. I'm so glad you could make it," he said, hugging her tightly. As Michael held her, Rosa's mind briefly flashed back to the boutique and everything that had happened earlier. She thought about how Michael, at such a young age, had overcome so much to get to where he was. And yet, here she was, an older woman with a lifetime of experiences, being dismissed in ways she knew all too well. She knew Michael was a force to be reckoned with. But what she didn't know was that, in the coming days, he would make sure no one would ever dismiss his grandmother or anyone else like her again. But for now, it was her moment to be proud. Her grandson had succeeded, and that's all that mattered at that moment. She wiped away the last of her tears and smiled at him. "I'm so proud of you, Michael," she said softly. And as the two of them left the event together, hand in hand, Rosa knew that this wasn't just his success, it was their success. As the night unfolded, Michael's pride in his grandmother was undeniable. He had worked tirelessly to reach this point. The keynote speech was one of his biggest career milestones, and his grandmother had always been his biggest supporter. But as they left the venue together, Michael noticed something in Rosa's eyes. Something that wasn't just the usual pride she carried. There was a quiet sadness behind that warm smile. When they got into the car, Michael couldn't ignore it any longer. "Granny," he started, his voice soft yet serious. "Something's bothering you. What happened? You weren't acting like yourself at the event. What's wrong?" Rosa paused, taking a moment to process her thoughts. She could feel the sting of the boutique incident fresh in her mind. She didn't want to upset Michael, but at the same time, she couldn't keep the hurt to herself. With a deep sigh, she recounted what had happened earlier in the day. She spoke about the boutique, the way the young clerks had disregarded her, the clerks' rude remarks, and how she had been made to feel invisible, despite her years of experience and hard-earned dignity. Michael listened intently, not interrupting, his jaw tightening as he heard the details. "I tried to ignore it, Michael," she said softly. "But you know, the more I think about it, the more it bothers me. I've seen this kind of thing before, and sometimes it feels like the world doesn't really see people like me, not like they see you." Michael's eyes darkened. He had never seen his grandmother so vulnerable. He hated hearing that someone had disrespected her, but he knew that what had happened was more than just a personal affront. It was a reflection of a larger issue, one that he had fought against for years in the corporate world. He was a CEO, after all. He had seen firsthand how deeply ingrained prejudices and biases could shape the way people were treated. But this was different. This was personal. As Rosa finished her story, Michael's resolve hardened. "Granny," he said, his voice steady with determination, "this isn't going to stand. You shouldn't have to feel invisible. You deserve respect. Every day, everywhere. And I'm going to make sure no one else treats you or anyone else like that again." The car ride was quiet for a moment as Rosa absorbed Michael's words. She knew her grandson well enough to understand that when he said he was going to do something, he meant it. But this was different. He wasn't just going to handle this behind closed doors. He was going to make sure the world knew what had happened. The next day, Michael called an emergency meeting with his team. As the CEO of a leading fashion brand, Michael had the power to influence not just the industry, but also the culture within it. He wasn't going to let this incident slide as just another day of business. He knew he had to act quickly. When the meeting started, he wasted no time. "I need every single one of you to understand something," he began, his tone commanding attention. "What happened to my grandmother yesterday, the way she was treated, dismissed as if she didn't belong, is unacceptable, and I will not stand by and let this happen again. Not to her, not to anyone." The room fell silent. Michael's reputation as a business mogul preceded him, but his commitment to justice and fairness was what made him truly respected. He had always valued integrity over profits, people over products. Now he was making it clear that respect and human dignity would be the foundation of the company's culture moving forward. "I'm going to hold every employee accountable," he continued, "from top to bottom. This is not just about a one-time incident. This is about how we treat people every single day. And I'm going to ensure that every single person who walks through our doors is treated with the respect they deserve, no matter their age, their appearance, or their background." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. "I'll be taking this to the stores immediately. We're going to implement mandatory retraining, and we're going to make sure every single person on the team knows that we don't just sell fashion. We sell respect. We sell dignity." Michael's assistant pulled up a new policy document on the screen, outlining the changes that would be made across all stores. He introduced new measures such as Respect First, a policy where employees would be required to engage with every customer within 30 seconds of them entering the store, regardless of how they appeared. He also announced the formation of a secret customer program, which would evaluate how employees treated older customers and those who might not fit the typical mold of a fashion-forward shopper. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. Michael wasn't done. He knew that words were not enough. Actions had to speak louder. As he walked out of the meeting room, he already had a plan in motion. He took to social media, sharing his grandmother's experience with his followers. Michael's online presence was massive, and he knew that this message would resonate with millions. He posted the video of Rosa walking out of the boutique, visibly upset, accompanied by a heartfelt message. "Today, my grandmother was treated as less than human in a place where respect should have been the foundation. Tomorrow, I'll make sure millions treat elders like royalty. This is bigger than one person. It's about the culture we want to create. Stay tuned." The response was overwhelming. People rallied behind Michael and his grandmother, sharing their own stories of discrimination and marginalization. His call for action sparked a global conversation about respect, ageism, and the importance of treating every customer with dignity. For Michael, it wasn't just about his grandmother. It was about the kind of world he wanted to build. A world where everyone, regardless of their age, their clothing, or their background, was seen, heard, and valued. This was his fight now, and he wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. As the days went by, Michael's message gained traction. The media picked up the story, and soon the boutique and its parent company were under fire for their treatment of Rosa. But Michael wasn't interested in just tearing down a company. He was interested in rebuilding the culture, in using his influence to create real, lasting change. The battle had just begun, and Michael knew that his actions would resonate long after the story had faded from the headlines. This wasn't just about his grandmother's hurt feelings. This was about standing up for what was right and creating a world where everyone was treated with the respect they deserved. It wasn't going to be easy, but with the support of his followers, his team, and his own unwavering resolve, Michael was determined to make sure the world remembered that dignity should never have an expiration date. The public outcry over what had happened to Rosa was far-reaching. It didn't take long for the viral video Michael had posted to spread across social media. People from all walks of life shared their own experiences of being ignored or dismissed, with many pointing to the ageism and discrimination they faced simply because they didn't look right for a certain space. The message was clear. It wasn't just Rosa. This was an issue that needed to be addressed head-on. Within 48 hours, Michael had received a call from the boutique's parent company. They had already felt the pressure. The weight of public backlash was more than they had anticipated. The company's executives were eager to meet with Michael, desperate to fix the issue before it tarnished their brand any further. But Michael had no intention of letting them off easy. He didn't want apologies. He wanted action, real and meaningful change. The first thing Michael did was demand a public apology. It wasn't just for his grandmother, but for every customer who had been treated with the same disregard. The boutique, along with its parent company, issued a formal apology that was shared widely on social media. But Michael didn't stop there. He made sure that the company committed to a change in their training and hiring practices, specifically around diversity, respect, and inclusion. As part of the new Respect First initiative, Michael also insisted that all employees go through sensitivity and customer service training, with a particular focus on understanding and respecting elderly customers. It wasn't just about checking boxes. He wanted the company to truly reflect the values he upheld, values of dignity, respect, and equal treatment for all. A week later, Michael invited Rosa back to the boutique. This time when she arrived, she was greeted with a warm welcome. The same young employees who had ignored her before now rushed to open the door for her. They were all smiles, eager to help. Rosa was overwhelmed. She didn't need extravagant gestures or apologies. What mattered to her most was that she was seen, that she was valued. She had always believed that respect was earned, but now she felt it was being given to her in abundance. It was the small yet significant acts of kindness that made the difference. But Michael wasn't done yet. He understood that change would take time and that it needed to be more than just one boutique's transformation. This needed to be a systemic shift, something that would ripple through the entire fashion industry and beyond. So Michael worked tirelessly behind the scenes, using his platform and influence to push for broader industry-wide changes. He wanted companies to look beyond appearances, beyond stereotypes, and focus on the true measure of a person, their character. At his company's headquarters, Michael introduced a new mentorship program to support young professionals, especially those from underrepresented communities, who often face challenges breaking into the industry. He also pushed for more accessible customer service options for elderly and disabled customers, including voice-activated apps for easier communication and better options for those with mobility challenges. It was clear that Michael wasn't just doing this for his own company. He wanted the world to see what it looked like when a business prioritized its customers as much as it did its profits. Meanwhile, the boutique's parent company took action as well. They began training all of their staff on diversity and inclusion practices, and they set up an ongoing program of internal reviews to ensure that discrimination wasn't slipping through the cracks again. The Respect First initiative became a permanent fixture, and Michael's influence was felt throughout the industry. Rosa, on the other hand, became an ambassador for the cause. As an 84-year-old woman who had lived through times of incredible social change, she was the perfect advocate. She attended talks and interviews, using her voice to speak up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. She became a beacon of strength and dignity, showing the world that it wasn't just about the clothes we wear, but about the way we treat others. One of the most impactful moments came when Michael invited Rosa to speak at a major industry event, where he introduced her as the keynote speaker. She stepped up to the stage, a little shaky but with a powerful presence, and looked out at the crowd. "I don't need a red carpet," she began, her voice steady. "I just need people to see that I'm still here, still worthy." The audience rose to their feet, applauding not just her words, but the journey that had led her there. The transformation had been nothing short of remarkable. And as Rosa's words sank in, Michael knew that he had done more than just fix a broken system. He had helped to create a new way of thinking, one where every person, no matter their age or background, could walk through life with dignity and respect. The impact of that moment was undeniable. The campaign didn't just change the boutique or the way people interacted with Rosa, it changed how the industry viewed respect, how customers saw themselves, and how businesses saw their role in shaping the world around them. The movement was just beginning, but Michael and Rosa had already made their mark. From that day forward, the fashion world would never look the same. Not because of the clothes, but because of the way people were treated. Respect had become the new luxury. And for Michael, the fight wasn't over. It was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, Rosa continued to be a pillar of strength, always teaching Michael and everyone around her that true luxury lies in how we treat others. No one had to be rich or wear designer labels to be valued. They only needed to be treated with kindness, respect, and humanity. This was a lesson that would stay with Michael forever. The journey was far from over, but Michael knew he was on the right path. A path where dignity was the ultimate accessory and respect the most valuable thing one could wear. Evelyn Thompson had always been a woman of simple pleasures. At 72, she had seen enough of life to appreciate the finer things, but never sought them out for herself. To her, luxury wasn't defined by flashy cars or designer outfits. It was in quiet moments with family, a warm meal shared, or the sense of belonging wherever she went. Evelyn wasn't someone to demand attention, but she certainly never expected to be treated as invisible. That evening, she had planned something she hadn't done in years, a nice dinner out. Her grandson, Jordan Thompson, had recently invited her to a special dinner at one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. The kind of place where the waitstaff wore uniforms that could have been plucked straight from a fashion magazine, and where everything from the silverware to the napkins felt like a statement of elegance. Evelyn had been excited about the evening all week. Her dress was simple but elegant, a soft lavender gown that made her feel graceful, the color complementing her silver hair. She had her hair done at the local salon and even put on her favorite pearl earrings. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to enjoy a quiet meal with her grandson, something that had been rare since he had become the CEO of a rapidly growing business. When she arrived at the restaurant, she felt the atmosphere shift immediately. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the ambient music provided a soothing backdrop. The restaurant's grand chandelier hung overhead, casting a warm golden light across the space. Guests in tuxedos and cocktail dresses surrounded her, laughing softly and sipping wine, an environment filled with sophistication. Evelyn stepped up to the hostess stand, where a young woman named Chloe Allen greeted her with a stiff smile. "Good evening. How can I help you?" "I'm here for my reservation," Evelyn replied, handing over the booking confirmation. Her voice was steady, a mixture of excitement and calm anticipation in her heart. Chloe looked at the reservation, then back at Evelyn, pausing for a beat longer than necessary. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. A subtle shift of her posture, a tiny frown at the corner of her mouth, and Evelyn instantly noticed the change. She hadn't even walked through the doors yet, but already she felt out of place. "Could you give me a moment?" Chloe asked, her tone suddenly colder than it had been when she greeted her. "I'll need to confirm your booking." Evelyn nodded, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't the first time someone had made her feel like she didn't belong. Ageism had a way of sneaking into the smallest of interactions, and Evelyn had come to accept that some people would never see her as capable or worthy of respect just because of her age. Still, she had always tried to push past that and embrace her own worth. But this was different. Chloe disappeared into the back, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the opulent lobby. She felt a pang of discomfort, but she wasn't about to let it ruin her night. She was here for Jordan, and nothing would take away the joy of spending time with him. A few moments later, Chloe returned with a manager in tow. Marcus West, a tall man in his early 40s with a confident stride and a crisp suit that barely looked like it had ever been touched. His hair was combed back in a precise style, his face neutral, but his eyes betrayed a hint of impatience. "This is Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, his voice clipped, as if speaking to her was an inconvenience. Chloe nodded quickly, and Marcus turned his attention back to Evelyn. "Mrs. Thompson, it seems there's been an issue with your reservation," he said, a little too matter-of-factly. "We typically reserve our premium tables for guests who fit our brand image. I'm afraid we can't seat you in the main dining area." Evelyn's heart sank. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "I have a reservation. I was invited here." Marcus glanced at Chloe for a moment before returning his gaze to Evelyn. "I'm afraid that, with your current attire and your appearance, we're unable to accommodate you at this time." The words hit her like a slap. Current attire? She was wearing a dress that could have been worn at any fancy dinner, any event where people came together to celebrate. But here she was, judged by the simplest of things. A deep sense of humiliation washed over her, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt like she had been reduced to nothing more than her age and appearance. I don't understand," Evelyn said, her voice wavering. "I have a reservation. Your staff confirmed it." Marcus's response was cold, almost rehearsed. "I'm sorry, but this is the policy. We have certain expectations for our guests. I'm happy to assist you in finding another place to dine, or perhaps you could make an appointment to come back at a later time." Evelyn stood frozen for a moment as the weight of what had just happened sank in. She had never been one to raise a scene, but this wasn't just any mistake. This was blatant discrimination. It wasn't just the treatment of an elderly woman, it was the stripping away of her dignity, the refusal to even recognize her as a human being worthy of respect. Without a word, she turned on her heel and walked out of the restaurant. The echoes of her footsteps on the polished floor rang louder than any words could have. Jordan Thompson had always believed in doing things the right way. He had built his business empire from the ground up, dealing with the struggles of being a young black CEO in a world that often looked past his accomplishments. He had fought through biases and broken barriers. But one thing had always remained constant: his respect for his family, especially his grandmother, Evelyn. Evelyn had raised him when his parents couldn't. She was his rock, his guiding light, and his biggest supporter. The thought of anything happening to her, especially something as deeply hurtful as discrimination, was simply unbearable. When he received the call that evening, he could hear the hurt in her voice. She never cried, but there was something different this time.